Have you ever given away the last thing you had, just to help someone else? Not because you expected anything in return. Not because you were being watched, but simply because it felt like the right thing to do. This is the story of a man who did just that. On a freezing winter night, standing alone at a bus stop, he gave away his only jacket to a stranger who looked colder than him. What he didn't know was, this woman wasn't just lost in the cold. She was the CEO of a powerful company. And that single act of kindness would come back to him in a way that would change his life forever. Stay with me till the end of this video, and you'll discover how one small gesture became the turning point in two very different lives. If you've ever doubted whether kindness still matters in today's world, this story will restore your faith and give you more than one reason to believe in second chances. It began on a night when the city had fallen quiet under heavy snowfall. The wind cut through the streets like knives. Most people had already gone home, but not Henry. He stood beneath a flickering street lamp at a nearly empty bus stop, shoulders hunched, trying to stay warm inside an old olive-green jacket that had clearly seen better days. In his arms, he clutched a thin manila folder as if it held something precious. Because it did. Inside were the last 5 copies of his resume, each one already stamped by rejection. He was 46 years old, once a proud structural engineer, a man who used to design buildings, lead teams, and provide for a family. But now he was just another shadow in a city that moved too fast to care. His shoes were worn, his fingertips cold, and his hope slowly fading. He was a widower, a father, and for now homeless. The digital clock on a nearby pharmacy sign blinked 8:41 p.m. The bus was late. The cold had soaked through his boots, up his legs, and into his bones. He shifted from foot to foot, trying to keep the feeling in his toes. He'd had longer nights, colder nights even, but tonight felt especially heavy. The snow didn't just fall, it pressed. He didn't know that this night would be different. He didn't know that someone was about to walk into his life. Someone who, like him, was also carrying a burden no one could see. But fate was already on its way, and all it took to unlock it was a single selfless choice. Henry Miles hadn't always lived this way. There was a time 10 years ago when his life looked very different. He was a builder, not just of structures, but of dreams. A structural engineer who once helped shape the city skyline. His days were full meetings, site inspections, laughter with coworkers. His nights, even better. He'd come home to a small house with a warm kitchen, a loving wife, and a son who ran into his arms the moment he stepped through the door. His wife, Lily, was a schoolteacher. She had a soft voice and a laugh that filled rooms. Their son, Noah, had just turned 7 when their world began to crack. It started with Lily's fatigue. Then came the hospital visits, the tests, the diagnosis, stage 4 cancer. There was no time to adjust, no time to plan. Henry quit his job so he could care for her full-time. Appointments became routine. Nights were spent at her bedside. He watched the woman he loved fade slowly, gently, painfully. In just 9 months, she was gone. Henry didn't remember much of the funeral, just Noah's small hand gripping his, and the silence that filled their house afterward. That's when everything else began to fall apart. Savings ran out. Bills kept coming. Without his job, the mortgage slipped out of reach. He sold the house, then the car, moved with Noah from one rental to another, each one smaller than the last. Until finally, there was nowhere left to go but the old 1998 Chevy pickup truck parked behind a forgotten warehouse. That truck became their home. But even then, Henry tried to keep normalcy alive for his son. He turned the back seat into a spaceship with pillows and blankets, told bedtime stories with a flashlight, heated canned soup on a camping stove like it was gourmet dinner. Every morning, he walked Noah to school with his shirt tucked in and his face freshly shaved. Because no matter how much they'd lost, Henry refused to let his son feel it. One day at a shelter, someone asked him, "Why do you still shave every day? Why do you cut your hair?" Henry had smiled sadly and said, "Because my son needs to believe things can get better, and I need to look like I believe it too." He took odd jobs, sweeping floors at construction sites, moving furniture, fixing leaky gutters, anything that paid just enough to get by. He never asked for pity. He never begged. All he wanted was a chance to start again. But the world doesn't always hand those out so easily. Then one day, social services stepped in. They said it wasn't safe anymore for Noah. A child needed stability. Walls, hot meals, a bed, not a truck and a father doing his best. Henry didn't fight. He knew they were right, but that didn't make it hurt less. He hugged his son tightly, whispering in his ear, "This is just for now. I'll come back for you." Since that day, every moment had been a climb. He kept trying. He attended free workshops, studied construction codes at the library, printed resumes at the community center, stood in job fair lines for hours, just hoping someone would give him a shot. But rejection came more often than hope. Still, he pressed on, because he had made a promise. And a father's promise, at least to Henry, was sacred. And now here he was, on a freezing night, at a lonely bus stop, holding those 5 final resumes that no one wanted. But he hadn't given up. Not yet, because somewhere out there his son was waiting. And Henry needed to believe that better days were still possible. And just when it seemed like nothing would change, a stranger stepped into the cold. And the story truly began. The snow had started falling heavier now. It danced under the yellow light of the street lamp, turning the sidewalk into a pale carpet. Henry shifted his weight from one foot to the other, pulling the collar of his jacket tighter around his neck. His fingers, stiff from the cold, clutched the manila folder tighter. Then he heard footsteps, sharp, quick, uneven. He looked up. A woman was walking toward the bus stop. Her heels clicked on the icy pavement, echoing against the silence. She looked out of place. Her clothes were expensive business skirt, silk blouse, leather handbag. But her arms were wrapped tightly around herself. Her hair was wet, stuck to her cheeks. No coat, no scarf. Nothing to fight the biting cold. She stopped under the awning beside him and didn't say a word. Her shoulders trembled as she rubbed her bare hands together. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. Henry looked away. He didn't want to stare. Didn't want to make her uncomfortable. After all, in this city, people passed each other every day without a second glance. But something about her made him glance again. She looked strong but fragile, like someone who was used to being in control, but had been caught in the wrong moment. The wind howled suddenly, sending a sharp gust straight through them both. She winced, her body curled in on itself. Her arms squeezed tighter around her ribs. Henry hesitated. His jacket wasn't much. The zipper barely worked. The lining was torn. It didn't even keep him that warm anymore. But right now it was all he had. He could stay silent. Keep it. Pretend he didn't see her shiver. But then again, he'd already lost so much. What was one more thing? Without saying a word, Henry unzipped his jacket. The cold bit into his skin instantly. He stepped closer, holding it out gently. Startled, she turned to him. "You don't have to do that," she said. Her voice was soft, but controlled. She wasn't used to receiving help. You could hear it in her tone. Henry gave a tired smile. I've already lost enough today, he said. This coat. It's the only thing I have left to give. She stared at him, stunned. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. Her lips were trembling too much. Still, Henry draped the jacket over her shoulders with careful hands. The fabric was worn, a little stiff from years of use, but it smelled clean, like soap, maybe coffee, maybe something warmer. The moment it touched her skin, her breath caught. "Thank you," she whispered. Henry nodded, then folded his arms across his chest, trying not to shake. They stood in silence for a while, two strangers under a broken light, surrounded by falling snow. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Henry." "I'm Claire." He nodded. "Nice to meet you, Claire." She looked at him again. "You shouldn't have given me your jacket." He gave a small, crooked smile. "Probably not, but I couldn't just let you freeze." Then, the low rumble of a bus broke the silence. Headlights pierced the snow as it pulled up beside them. Claire took a small step forward, then paused. She turned back to him. "Do you have somewhere to go?" she asked. Henry shrugged. "Somewhere," he said vaguely. He didn't mention it was an old truck with no heat, parked behind a warehouse. It didn't matter. She didn't need to know that. She reached into her purse and pulled out a card. "In case you ever need anything," she said, handing it to him. Henry took it, slid it into his folder without looking. He didn't expect much from it. People said things like that all the time. Most didn't mean it. Claire stepped onto the bus. The doors closed behind her with a soft hiss. Through the frosted glass, she looked back once. The jacket was wrapped tightly around her like a shield. And then the bus pulled away into the snow. Henry watched until the red tail lights vanished. He was alone again, shivering not just from the cold, but from something else. Something deeper. Something he couldn't quite explain. He looked up at the sky, then down at the empty street. "Maybe tomorrow," he whispered, then turned and walked into the night. The bus ride home was quiet. Claire sat near the back, her arms wrapped tightly around the jacket. It hung awkwardly on her frame. Too big, too old, but it felt like a blanket pulled straight from another world. The scent was unfamiliar, yet comforting. So, coffee, maybe even something nostalgic. She didn't even realize her hands had stopped shaking. Her apartment was on the 28th floor of a luxury building that rose high above the frozen city. When she stepped into the marble lobby, the warmth washed over her like a wave. The doorman greeted her politely, but she barely responded. Her heels clicked softly as she made her way to the elevator. The silence inside echoed louder than the winter wind outside. When she opened the door to her penthouse, the space welcomed her with cold perfection.
No mess, no noise, no warmth.
Designer furniture sat untouched. Stainless steel appliances hummed softly in the background. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glowing city skyline. But nothing moved.
No laughter.
No life. Just her. And now, this jacket. Claire slipped off her shoes and walked slowly through the apartment. She was about to fold the jacket and set it aside when her hand brushed against something inside the inner pocket. She paused, reached in, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn, the corners creased, the surface smudged with age and fingerprints. Carefully, she opened it. It was a child's drawing done in bright crayons. 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands under a crooked yellow sun. A little red heart floated between them. Above the tall figure, it read, "Dad." Above the small one, "Me." At the bottom, in uneven handwriting, "I love you, Daddy. Noah." The paper trembled in her hands. Her breath caught. Something broke open inside her, quietly but completely. That name, Noah. It echoed in her mind like a whisper she hadn't heard in years. Suddenly, everything made sense. The man at the bus stop wasn't just someone down on his luck. He was a father, a man still holding onto the one thing that gave him strength, a drawing from his son. Claire sat down slowly on the edge of her couch, the jacket still draped over her shoulders, the drawing in her hands. Her throat tightened, her eyes blurred. For years, Claire had built a life from the ground up, hard, fast, and without looking back. She had clawed her way out of a childhood filled with loss, moved through foster homes, slept on church steps, ate from food pantries. She had once been that little girl no one saw, until one night. She had been 12. It was snowing. She had run away from another cruel foster home and curled up on the steps of a church, hoping morning would come quickly. And someone had found her. An old man, weathered face, kind eyes. He didn't ask questions, just took off his coat and wrapped it around her. She never saw him again, but she remembered how it felt to be seen, to be helped, to matter even if only for a moment. That moment changed everything. Now, years later, she had become someone powerful, someone respected, CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies on the East Coast. Infinity Group was her empire, her life, her achievement, but in the process, she had lost something. Tonight, a stranger at a bus stop reminded her of what that was. She looked again at the drawing in her hand, then down at the coat in her lap. The tears came without warning, not loud, not dramatic, just soft, steady release, the kind that comes from a heart that's been closed too long. She hugged the coat to her chest. It smelled like someone who had tried, someone who had fought to stay kind, even when life took everything. And for the first time in years, Claire Langston cried. Not because she was weak, but because something in her had finally awakened. The next morning, the city looked fresh, cleaned by snow and quiet under gray skies. But inside her sleek, sunlit office, Claire Langston was far from calm. She sat at her desk with a cup of untouched coffee and the crayon drawing unfolded in front of her. She had studied every stroke of it like it held the key to something she had forgotten. Maybe it did. Claire hadn't slept. Not really. Her mind kept returning to the man at the bus stop. Henry, the way he smiled when he had nothing, the way his voice trembled, but still sounded kind, the way he handed her the jacket as if it were gold. She kept seeing his eyes, tired but steady. She had lived with powerful men all her adult life, but not one of them had ever given her something without asking for something in return. He had, and she couldn't just forget that. She reached into her desk and rang a small silver bell. Moments later, her assistant, Rachel, appeared in the doorway. "Yes, Miss Langston?" Claire didn't look up. Her voice was calm, but her eyes told another story. "I need you to help me find someone." Rachel blinked. "Of course. Who?" Claire hesitated for a beat. This wasn't like her. She always had answers. Numbers, names, data. But now all she had was a moment, and a man who had disappeared into the snow. "His name is Henry," she said finally. "He was at the bus stop at 56th and Madison last night, around 8:30 p.m. He gave me his jacket." Rachel raised her eyebrows slightly, but said nothing. "I don't have a last name," Claire continued, "but I want to find him." Rachel nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do." "And Rachel," Claire added, looking her directly in the eye, "this stays between us. The assistant gave a small nod, understanding something deeper was at play here. Then she left the room. Over the next few days, Claire's team quietly worked behind the scenes. They were used to tracking down brilliant engineers and high-level developers. But this was different. Henry didn't have a LinkedIn profile that matched his present reality. No home address, no business contacts, just a face caught in traffic camera footage. A man bundled in a too-thin jacket. They followed the bus routes from that night, cross-referenced entry logs, checked public shelter boards and open job forums. Finally, Rachel returned with a thin folder. "His name is Henry Miles," she said. She placed the folder gently on Claire's desk. "He used to be a structural engineer. No recent employment history, but he's been asking around in online construction forums, looking for work." Claire opened the folder slowly. Inside was an old photo from a driver's license, a resume from years ago, notes scribbled about available jobs, a list of shelters he had visited, a phone number linked to a prepaid cell phone, no permanent address, no family connections listed, no records of crime,
No debts.
no drama, just absence. Then Rachel added something else. "One of our team members spotted him yesterday," she said. "Near the south end of the Bronx. There's an old pickup truck parked behind a warehouse. He's been seen coming and going. Looks like he's sleeping in it." Claire stood up. "I want to go there." Rachel blinked. "We could send someone, or ask him to come here." "No," Claire said, her voice quiet but certain. "This isn't a meeting. This is personal." Rachel didn't press further. She simply nodded. "I'll have someone drive you." An hour later, Claire sat in the back seat of a black sedan as it moved slowly through streets far from polished skyscrapers and boardroom deals. The buildings here were older, the paint chipped, the sidewalks cracked. People walked with their collars turned up and eyes low. Then the car slowed. "There," the driver said. Claire looked out the window. In the shadow of a brick warehouse sat a rusted, snow-covered pickup truck. The windows were fogged from the inside, the tires half buried in slush. She stepped out slowly. The cold met her immediately, but this time she didn't shiver. She walked across the gravel lot, her heels crunching softly beneath her. As she approached the truck, the driver's side door creaked open. Henry stepped out, squinting in the daylight. He looked tired, confused. His clothes were wrinkled, his face unshaven, his boots damp with snow. He stared at her. "Claire?" he asked, unsure if he was dreaming. She gave a small, gentle smile.
Henry.
He looked down at himself, then at the old truck behind him. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you," she said softly. His brow furrowed. "Why?" She hesitated. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about what you did," she said. "About who you are." Henry crossed his arms, defensive now. "You didn't have to come all this way to say thank you." Claire shook her head. "This isn't about thanks," she said. "It's about not letting something good disappear without being seen." They stood in silence. Two people from two worlds. One made of glass and steel, the other of rust and cold. Henry finally exhaled. "You came all this way, just for that?" Claire nodded. "Yes," she said quietly, "and maybe something more." The silence between them lingered like fog. Henry rubbed his hands together, not just from the cold, but from nerves he couldn't name. He had been alone for so long. He had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen, to be remembered. Claire looked at him, steady and calm. "Will you come with me?" she asked. "Just for a little while. There's something I want to show you." Henry glanced at his truck, at the sleeping bag in the back seat, at the old coffee thermos sitting on the dashboard. He hesitated, then looked back at her. I don't have much time. I'm supposed to be at the job site today. I already spoke to your foreman, Claire replied. Henry raised his eyebrows. How did you even know? I asked around, she said with a small shrug. Told him you had an interview. Henry gave a short laugh. Not mocking, just surprised. I don't have an interview. Claire smiled faintly. You do now. Against every instinct in his body, he nodded. He didn't know why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the way she said it. Or maybe it was because for the first time in years, someone was inviting him. Not rescuing him, not preaching to him, not judging him, but inviting him. They drove in silence. Henry sat in the back seat, glancing out the window, tugging at his sleeves. His hands were calloused, his jeans worn thin. He felt out of place already. When they arrived at Infinity Group's towering downtown headquarters, Henry hesitated before stepping out. The building gleamed like a glass monument, so clean it reflected the sky. I don't belong in there, he muttered under his breath. Claire turned to him. Just come upstairs. She led him into a quiet conference room on the 30th floor. It was modern but warm. Soft light. No board members. No intimidating crowd. Just her and him. Henry sat slowly, unsure what to expect. Claire placed a folder on the table and pushed it gently toward him. He stared at it. What's this? She folded her hands in front of her. A job offer. Henry let out a dry laugh. You're kidding. I'm not. He opened the folder with shaking fingers. Inside was a proposal, a job description, a small contract, a single title typed in bold letters, Cultural and Human Values Advisor. He frowned. I don't understand. What would I even do? You'd sit in on meetings, she explained. You'd help guide how we train, how we lead, how we build. Not just with strategy, but with heart. Henry looked at her. I'm not a psychologist. I didn't go to Harvard. I sleep in a truck. You were an engineer, she said. You built things. You led people. I haven't built anything in years. She leaned forward, voice softer now. You built something last week, Henry. A moment. One that changed my life. He looked down, unable to hold her gaze. I'm not qualified for something like this. Claire was quiet for a second. Then she said, You don't need a degree to teach people how to care, because you live it every day, and that's more powerful than anything you'll ever put on a resume. Henry's throat tightened. No one had ever said anything like that to him. Not in years. He stared down at the paper again. At his name, printed neatly in bold. At the space for his signature. His fingers hovered there, unsure. This isn't charity? He asked finally. No, Claire said. This is a role no one else can fill. We've got the brains, the tech, the reach. But what we're missing is what you already carry with you. He didn't answer right away. His chest felt too full. Too many feelings all at once. Gratitude, fear, disbelief. But under all of it, something else. Something unfamiliar. Hope. He stood up slowly, folder still in his hands. I need time, he said, his voice low. Claire nodded. Take it. As he walked out, her voice followed him gently. You reminded me of who I used to be, Henry. Now let me remind you of who you still are. Henry sat on a bench outside the glass building, the folder still unopened in his lap. The streets buzzed quietly with the rhythm of the city. Taxis passed. Footsteps echoed. Life went on as if nothing had changed. But something had. and Henry didn't know what to do with it. His fingers brushed the edge of the contract. He hadn't even read it yet, not because he wasn't curious, but because he was afraid. Afraid it wasn't real. Afraid it was just pity in a pretty package. Afraid he'd step into something good and somehow ruin it. Because when you've been surviving for so long, even kindness can feel like a trap. She's just being nice. This won't last. You'll mess it up. You always do. That voice in his head had grown loud over the years. He had fed it without knowing. Let it sit beside him on cold nights. Let it speak for him in front of mirrors. So now, even as the city offered him a hand, he found himself pulling away. He didn't see Claire come out of the building. She sat quietly beside him. No words, just presence. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "You didn't open it." Henry gave a dry chuckle. "Didn't think I needed to. I already know how this ends." She turned to look at him. "How? Someone like me doesn't belong in a place like this." Claire didn't answer right away. "You think I offered you that job out of pity?" He didn't reply. She stood up. "Come with me," she said. "Just for an hour.
No sweets.
No pressure. Just trust me." Henry looked at her, then nodded. Again, they drove out of the city, away from the tall buildings and glowing signs, into a quieter part of town, past smaller homes, old corner stores, playgrounds covered in snow. Finally, they stopped in front of a simple red brick building with a faded green awning. A painted wooden sign read, "Thomas's Place, a safe space for every child." Claire stepped out first. Henry followed slowly. Inside, the walls were painted bright yellow, covered with little handprints, quotes about kindness, painted animals, crayon rainbows. The air smelled like crayons and fresh bread. Laughter echoed from down the hall. Real, high, unfiltered laughter. The kind that only children can make. She led him past a reading room, a small kitchen, into a wide playroom where kids sat in circles, built puzzles, played games. Some drew on the floor. One was reading aloud too loudly. No one stopped him. "This place," Claire said softly, "was named after the man who saved me." Henry looked around, stunned by the warmth in the room. "I grew up in foster homes," she continued. "Some were kind, some weren't. One night I ran away. It was freezing. I was 12. I curled up outside a church." She paused. "He found me, an old man named Thomas. He didn't ask questions. He just gave me his coat, sat beside me, stayed until morning. I never saw him again. But that night, he made me believe I mattered." Henry didn't speak. "I built this place because of him," she added, "because I never forgot what it meant to be seen, to be helped, just once." She turned and looked at Henry fully. "And last week, someone else gave me a coat. Didn't know who I was. Didn't ask anything. Just gave." Her voice softened further. "You reminded me of him, not because of what you gave me, but because of who you are." Henry blinked rapidly. She stepped closer. "I don't need you to fit into a boardroom, Henry. I need you to remind people of this, of what kindness looks like when it's real." He looked away. His eyes burned, but the tears came anyway. Quiet, real. He didn't speak. He just nodded. Not for the job, not for the office, but because, for the first time in years, he felt needed again. He felt human again. Henry's first day at Infinity Group came with no grand welcome.
No balloons. No headlines. No spotlight.
Just a quiet meeting in a glass-walled room on the 5th floor, where a few department heads gathered out of curiosity. Claire introduced him simply. This is Henry Miles. He's here to help us build something more meaningful than just profit." The executives gave polite nods, smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Henry didn't mind. He didn't come to impress them. He came to speak, not as a businessman, not as a motivational speaker, but as himself. He told his story, not the dramatic version, not the tragedy-heavy kind, just the truth. He spoke about what it felt like to lose everything, to sleep in a freezing truck, to line up for jobs in shoes with holes, to sit in silence at a shelter and pretend you weren't scared, and most of all, to choose kindness anyway. First, the room was quiet. Then someone leaned in. Then another. By the end of that week, people started showing up at his little office. Interns, programmers, project leads, HR staff, not for reports, but for relief. Some came to talk about burnout, others about family. Some just needed to sit across from someone who wouldn't judge. Henry listened, and when he spoke, it was never with big solutions or business quotes. It was real. He said things like, "You're not broken, you're tired. And being tired doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've cared too long without someone caring back." That line, it ended up printed on mugs, pinned to cubicles, quoted in company emails. Claire watched from her corner office as the company slowly began to shift. Break room conversations changed. People laughed more. Managers checked in differently, not just on deadlines, but on each other. The company didn't just grow. It started to glow. And Henry, he got his own space. A small room on the 6th floor. Cozy, quiet, filled with secondhand books, a few potted plants, and a coffee pot that never seemed to run out. Outside of work, life began to rebuild. With help from the company's housing stipend and Claire's quiet support, Henry signed a lease on a small one-bedroom home on the edge of Brooklyn. It wasn't fancy, but it had a porch, a garden plot, and walls that didn't rattle in the wind. More importantly, it had space for Noah. Now, in his first year at a local university, Noah moved back in with his father. Their first dinner in the new house was simple: spaghetti and garlic bread. Henry would remember it for the rest of his life. "You kept your promise," Noah said that night, wiping his eyes. Henry didn't respond, not with words, but the look in his eyes said everything. As for Claire and Henry, they saw each other almost daily now. First it was work, then it was lunch, then it was late-night texts, then long walks through quiet parks. It wasn't fast, it wasn't flashy, it was gentle, and it was real. Two people who had both been broken in different ways, slowly learning how to be whole again. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Claire stood beside Henry on the rooftop. "You've changed this place," she said softly. Henry chuckled. "No, I just reminded them of what they already knew." She smiled. "And reminded me, too." Later that month, Henry finished leading a resilience workshop when a young man, barely 22, lingered behind. His hands shook, his voice barely a whisper. "Last month I was going to quit," the young man said. "Everything. Life." Henry's chest tightened. "But then I heard you speak," the boy continued. "You said people don't need to be fixed. They just need to be heard. No one had ever said that to me before." He looked Henry in the eyes. "If it weren't for you, I don't think I'd still be here." Henry didn't speak. He just reached out, placed a hand on the young man's shoulder, and nodded. "I'm really glad you are," he whispered. Later that night, Henry sat alone in his small office. The lights dimmed, the city beyond the windows glowing like a heartbeat. He looked at the folder Claire had once handed him. It no longer scared him. It no longer felt like a maybe, felt like a life, a second chance, a real beginning. The atrium at Infinity Group had never looked like this before. Gone were the banners for quarterly profits and new product launches. In their place hung soft white drapes, strings of warm fairy lights, dozens of paper hearts taped along the glass walls, each one with a word written by hand. Hope, grace,
Seconde chance.
kindness. At the center of the room stood a simple sign in elegant gold script, One Kindness Day. Employees lined the hallways shoulder to shoulder. Some wore suits, others came in jeans. But no one was here for a promotion, a pitch, or a project. They came for something deeper. On stage, Claire Langston stepped to the podium. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled back. Her voice was soft, but sure. This day isn't about numbers, she began. It's about moments. The room grew still. A year ago, I was standing at a bus stop, tired, cold, lost in more ways than one. And a man I had never met offered me his coat. A soft stir moved through the crowd. It was old, worn, but in that moment it was everything, because it reminded me that kindness doesn't wait until it's convenient. It doesn't ask questions. It simply shows up. She turned to an easel beside her and removed the cloth draped over it. Behind the glass was the coat, faded at the sleeves, torn at the collar, but preserved like something sacred. Beneath it, a bronze plaque read, One small act of kindness can rewrite a life. Claire turned back to the crowd. That act didn't just change my night. It changed my life. And today we honor the man who made it possible. She looked to the side of the stage. Henry, will you come up here? For a moment, no one moved. Then Henry stood. He wore a borrowed suit. It didn't fit perfectly, but it was pressed with care. He walked slowly to the stage, past rows of people clapping softly, not out of politeness but respect. He stood beside Claire, face steady, eyes wet. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope. This belongs to you, she said. Inside, the deed to his house. Stamped, signed, official. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Claire leaned closer with a smile. No more sleeping in trucks. The applause grew, but Henry held up a hand. I actually have something too, he said. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a small, simple box. He turned to Claire, his voice trembling. You said this coat changed your life, but you changed mine. He opened the box. Inside, a silver ring. Nothing flashy, but it caught the light just enough. I kept this in the pocket, he said, for the day I might believe in the future again. He took a breath, then another. Claire Langston, will you marry me? The room froze. Then Claire laughed. A quiet, choked, beautiful sound. She nodded, tears falling freely. Yes, of course, yes. The atrium erupted into applause. People rose to their feet. Some wiped their eyes. Others just smiled, caught in the glow of something too rare to explain. 1 month later, they were married. Not in a ballroom, not at a 5-star hotel, but at Thomas's place, the red brick community center that had once saved Claire's life. The chairs didn't match. The cake was made by a shy intern. Children made paper flowers. Someone played a guitar out of tune. But the room glowed with something money could never buy. Claire wore a simple dress. Henry wore the same suit. Noah stood proudly as best man. The guests, co-workers, volunteers, former shelter residents, children who had been helped, people who had found their way just like Henry once did. During the vows, Claire held Henry's hands and looked into his eyes. You once gave me your coat, she said. Tonight, I give you my whole life. The words fell over the room like sunlight. Henry couldn't speak. He just nodded, tears falling without shame, as the crowd cried with them. That night, someone snapped a photo. Henry and Claire standing beneath the sign of Thomas's place. Her head on his shoulder, his arm around her, and beside them on a wooden easel, the old jacket. Silent, worn, now immortal. That photo would circle the internet within days. Shared, reposted, talked about, not because it was glamorous, but because it was true. A simple coat, a single act, a broken man, powerful woman, and the quiet, unstoppable power of kindness. Henry never had much, but he gave what he had, and in return he got back everything he lost. His name, his purpose, his son, his future, his heart, and the love of a woman who once stood shivering in the cold, and now stood beside him for life. Sometimes the smallest acts, the ones no one sees, the ones we think won't matter, become the ones that change everything. So if this story touched you, if it reminded you that hope still lives in quiet corners, and that kindness still has power, please like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Because the world doesn't just need more noise. It needs more hearts. Until next time, stay kind and keep believing.